You see the top?
It's awesome. I love that.
Okay. Allison, are you ready?
I was going to wait sort of till just a few more seconds went by after 1 o'clock just to see how many people would log in. Because like Bethany said, sometimes boy, people just start popping in at the end. I'll go ahead and start. I would like to welcome everybody to the Niswonger Rural Life Virtual Summer Institute. We appreciate everybody showing up. And I'm Allison Seeley. I'm your host. Catherine Edwards is also your host. And if you have any questions or comments you want to put in the chat, we're going to try to keep up with the chat for Miss Ree Dunn and Holly English. And anyway, we'll try to answer any questions or pause if we have any technical difficulties. We've actually got John Payne on here to help us out. But again, I just want to thank everybody for coming, and I'm looking forward to this session. Ree Dunn is an English teacher at Science Hill High School. I've had the privilege of working with Ree for a few years, and she's excellent. And Holly English is a guidance counselor at Science Hill, and she does a great job helping a lot of kids out. So I'm really thankful that they said they would come help out and do this program, because they're by far more experts on some of this than some of us are. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them. I will remind everybody that there is a certificate of attendance, and Catherine or I will drop it in the chat box towards the end of the session. And you need to remember just to do that, fill that out in a timely manner, because it is time-stamped, and that way you'll get credit for this session. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And I think I've covered everything. So Ree and Holly, I'm just going to turn it over to you guys, okay?
All right. Thank you so much. Hi, guys. I am Holly English, and this is Ree. And we're going to talk to you guys today about prioritizing social emotional learning in the classroom as a gateway to increased equity and literacy. One of the things that I wanted to kind of preface for this conversation is my background is clinical mental health. I was a mental health therapist before I became a school counselor. So that's going to taint a large part of my conversation. And we have been able to kind of team together and work together pretty closely, not only for the kids that we have both in her classroom that are also my kids that I see, but then also talking about something that she's going to talk and dive into later on as a project that we've been working together on, and how to really increase equity. So we're really excited to be with you guys today.
Something that we want to do for you is to kind of empower you. We can have a discussion about what goes on in our classrooms, what we can do in our classrooms, but a powerful piece of this is going to be hopefully us being able to empower you to take this knowledge back, not just for yourself, but for your colleagues as well. We both feel very strongly about this. We're both very passionate about social emotional learning being a huge part of our jobs as people in school. And we just want to be able to do that for you and help you go back to your classrooms, to your schools with some strategies. So this is going to, yeah, we're going to share the screen. As many times as I've done this, you think that I would be a pro at it. But the first thing we're going to do as we pull this up is to go to a poll everywhere. And so we want to ask you guys if you feel comfortable implementing social emotional learning in your classroom. This is just to kind of see where everybody is. So this is the bit.ly. You can go to it on your phone. You can go to it on your computer. But if you type that in, it'll take you theoretically to a poll everywhere that I created. And we'll kind of get a scale as to where everybody is. So if you'll type that in just a second, I'm going to pull up the poll just kind of so that we can see where everybody is. And there's just one question.
Hey, Ree, could you take that and cut and paste it and put it in the chat box so everybody could just click on it?
I sure can. That was a good idea. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then we'll go.
I know some things, not a lot, but.
And more, stop share. Here's the chat. Thank you, John. John did it for us. Thank you, John. So here's our poll.
I think that took me to a Padlet. Is that where I was supposed to go?
Oh, no. This, okay. Well, we're going to change. We're going to change what we're doing right now, and we're just going to open up to conversation instead of the poll everywhere that didn't work. That starts out everything. So, as it says,
It happens there a lot. It happens there.
technology, it's the best. But we'll just put questions in the chat box, and Allison's going to kind of run that to us. So we'll get started on what we're going to talk to you about.
All right, guys. So we really wanted to run that poll just because I do know in the world of education, we have so many acronyms. SEL is one of those acronyms that's thrown about all the time, but it's social emotional learning. What does that actually mean? And a lot of people will layer this with trauma informed, and they just don't feel very comfortable with that language. So when we're talking about social emotional learning today, what I really want us to focus on is that when we're saying SEL or social emotional learning, or how you implement this in your classroom, this is really about how to build relationships and how to really sustain relationships. So what I started with is, if you just take a second, and you can do this, of course, some of you don't have your cameras on, but if you want to turn your camera off, close your eyes. What made you decide that you wanted to become a teacher or work in a school in some capacities? Because I know not all of us are teachers. When you decided that you wanted to be with children as a majority of your daytime, why was this decision fueled? What led up to that decision that you made, and who is there to support you? So I asked these questions for a lot of reasons. I want you guys to kind of think back on it as you go. But one of the things that sticks out to me in my journey is that whenever people ask, why do you do this? It's a story. It's a narrative. I could go back to high school saying, hey, I worked at the Boys and Girls Club, and this child impacted me in this way. And then this is how, long story short, it ended. What I tell you is a narrative part of my life. I might give you chapter 2. I might give you chapter 13. That's really the mindset that I want us to talk about today, especially as we layer social emotional learning with ELA, is that we're really looking at this as if there is a narrative involved. And I want you all to kind of go back to the roots of your own narrative when we're talking about social emotional learning. So when we're talking about this, we also have to realize that when we're working with students in any capacity, and this goes perfectly hand in hand with ELA, is that when we're asking about their lives, it's their narrative. They are the ones that are going to be able to talk openly about their own life experiences. We learn about parables, we learn in books, and of course, this is the piece that we really connect with ELA, is that we're able to talk with students about experiences and stories in light of and in lieu of. And another thing I want to add today in our conversation is that I really appreciate a safe environment to ask questions. We don't know everything. We're not even going to pretend to know everything. But given the COVID-19 epidemic or pandemic, and then we also have the racial inequality and the conversations that we've had recently, is that we want you all to ask those tough questions today. And we want you all to be able to really kind of dig into that and explore anything that you all have questions that we may not know the answers, but we're going to try to connect with you to somebody that may have better, even better resources for you to implement in your classroom. When we're talking about narratives and our students in social emotional learning, keep that in mind as well, because when they come back to us in the fall, their story, their chapter 13, 14, 2, 3 is going to also include a COVID-19 pandemic, and it's also going to include what's happening in our society today. So just wanted to open that up for a safe, we have a safe place here to ask some questions. So as we're talking about the importance of this, starting SEL in our classrooms, I really just wanted us to go in with that mindset, that when we're talking with students, we can take out the acronym of SEL and we can really replace it with, what is this person's story? So a lot of stories, 50 to 61%, actually involve trauma. You will hear trauma come in a lot of different forms. Trauma can be that word, trauma. It can be toxic stress. If you're familiar with any of the ACEs studies, if you've gone to any of the ACEs trainings, you've heard the language of toxic stress, chronic trauma. All of these words are kind of, they all can fulfill the same intent, that this person or individual had an experience that impacted them so significantly that they may not have been able to cope with it in a healthy way. That's really what trauma means. Now, trauma can be a one-time event. If I get into a car accident, and it really impacts me and I have a hard time ever getting behind the wheel again, that could be my one-time event trauma. It can also be multiple and chronic. It could be a student is going home every single night and they don't have access to food, so they don't know where their next meal is. That can be a chronic stress and chronic trauma, or that they've had an abuser that comes home every holiday season and then they get chronically abused. But if you look at this number, this is a big number. 50 to 61% of us will have it at some point in time in our life. That means half of your classroom, there's a good chance, has already experienced some kind of a toxic stress or trauma, whatever language you want to use with it. And a lot of our students that are coming back from the COVID-19 pandemic, coming into our classrooms in the fall, that's really what we're focusing on in one of those situations, that this just increased the amount of stress and trauma that they have been under. I know that whenever I've looked in the news and looking at resources around us recently, that suicidal ideation has increased, suicide attempts have increased, and also the amount of people actually doing referrals for child abuse has decreased because the kids aren't here. They're not seeing the safe people that they normally see to have that conversation. So I just wanted to put this out there for that.
And these are things that sometimes it's easy for us to shy away from in the classroom. But we have such a large amount of time with our students in our classrooms that though sometimes some of the things we're going to talk about in here are uncomfortable, but these are really as important as anything academic that we're going to cover with our students. Because if we don't have this realization, we don't address these issues, then academics are definitely not going to be there either.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we're going to move on here. And really my part of this is giving insight and in-depth to the mental health perspective. And then she's going to give the classroom perspective. I feel like having an expert that's in that realm is much more impactful than me talking about the classroom. So when we're talking about students that could potentially come back from this break, and they may or may not have trauma experiences that manifest in different ways. And what I did here is I did this list. Now, this is not exhaustive. Students can have one of these, they can have 10 of these, they can have some that are not on this list. But when we do have students coming back, these are things we really need to be looking for in our classroom setting that we need to keep eyes on. Anger, resentment, hurt, isolation, depression, worthlessness. And you will learn some of the way that they feel and the way that they are speaking to themselves, their inner dialogue, through language that they may write in your classroom, language that they may speak to you, talking about their worthlessness and their loneliness. They may be able to verbalize that, or there's a good chance. So making sure that you're keeping these manifestations in mind. On the right side, we also talked about the actual action points that you might see. And I know that we're covering a lot of different age groups, K through 12. This could be appropriate. You might see throwing and hitting things, especially if you're in the elementary age. That is one really obvious way that they're going to be showing you that they're not able to cope with what's happening right now. You might see yelling and screaming, self-harm or suicidal thoughts. And self-harm can include cutting. It can also include a lot of other things like hitting their head against the wall. Self-harm can also include punching themselves, depending on the age group that they're at. It can include taking substances that they shouldn't be taking, because that is a self-harm situation. So really looking at their behaviors and how it's manifesting. If they are having more than one of these, if they have one of these, you really want to pay attention. If they have more than 1, 5, 6, 7, the higher number that they have, the more increased at risk they could be for some kind of an experience. So just knowing that if you're starting to see these things, we really need to pay attention to how we're going to get them help in the classroom.
And some common classroom behaviors after trauma, obviously a lot of those happen, but students can act out a lot of these ways. The first important step that we need is to de-escalate, to give the student space to calm down. Because as we learn from science classes, psychology classes, that they're in the fight or flight mindset. And we need to respect that and do what we can to nurture the child's health. Obviously in the classroom, there's a balance between nurturing health and then keeping a balance and keeping your classroom kind of a safe space for everyone. And if you have a lot of behaviors going on in class, and you have the other, 34 kids to think about as well. So keeping them in mind, finding out, building that relationship with the kid, finding out what they need to do to calm down. and just keep in mind that you owe that child respect, and you owe that child the space to calm down so that you can figure out what's going on with that child and how to best help them. Because again, without that nurturing there, without that safe space for that child, then your academics are just going to go by the wayside.
And I'll add in here, when you're looking at studies done by adults that are trying to work on their own de-escalation, it is on average, it takes an adult, a pretty well-adjusted adult, about 20 minutes to de-escalate. And that's if you're really upset, if you're really angry, it's your central nervous system takes about 20 minutes to get back down to a baseline. So for an average well-functioning adult, it's going to take that long. Sometimes, especially as you go down with the ages, it's going to take them much longer to get to a point of de-escalation. So time away is a really, really good, like giving them a break is a really good first step in de-escalation. That doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be totally alone, because giving them space, literally physical space, can really help at de-escalation. It may take them 30 minutes. And for a person that has had a very significant trauma background, it might take them 40, 45, 50 minutes, depending on what their experience is like. It might take them that long to get to a point they're at baseline so that you can have the conversation, whatever that next conversation is. So just keeping that in mind, because I do think sometimes when especially as we get into this fall and we're not really sure what to expect from a lot of different areas, that you might have a lot of kids that need that break. They've gone from being kind of isolated to going back into a school system with a ton of peer interaction, a ton of adult interaction. Again, it might be a hard adjustment for them.
And just a second note on de-escalation, I had a great undergrad experience. I had a great, graduate school experience, but I was never taught about de-escalation. You may have been, but I didn't know about that. And so some of the resources that we've provided at the end kind of talk through that and kind of give you some strategies for that. And I think that's something that not only can we use as teachers and keep in mind, or as professionals in schools, but that's something that's important to share with our colleagues as well.
So SEL made simple. Really, relationships are key. And I know that this is probably kind of one of those hot topic words that gets thrown around all the time, but I have to hit this, because if you don't have that relationship with your students, the social emotional piece will never be there. The learning might be there to some extent. It won't be there to the full extent, but it'll be there to some extent. But relationship is where you build the trust foundation for that social emotional piece, for them to feel safe, for them to express, for them to be even feeling that they're not going to be in a fight or flight mode, so that they can learn, so that their cognition is more free for them to be able to do that and to process that information. So over here, I put number 1, know your student's story from their own expression. This is really important. We all have our own story. We're going to go with this narrative theme. We all have our own story. Your students may tell you something that seems outlandish, or it seems unreasonable, or it seems that your first thought might say, oh, that's not necessarily true. But to them, that's their expression of that story. You don't have to necessarily even believe the whole story, but to know that this is their expression. It's what's underneath that. Is that fear? Is that anger? Is that comfort? Is that trust? Whatever is underneath that story is the important part. Take that time to get to know them and personally listen. That's hard. I'm going to be honest, guys. Like in a classroom, when you have, especially if you have testing, this is an internal battle. Like you're going to dialogue with yourself and say, do I have time for this? I could move on to this. I really don't need to do this because I'm going to get tested on this. I get that. If you take that time to show them that you're going to listen, even for 2 to 3 minutes every now and then, that's going to build for a successful relationship with that student. If you're not taking that time, you'll never have the foundation to go. Realize this, number 3, realize this foundation for the relationship is trust. A part of that is listening. A part of that is letting them express their own story, but that without that trust in them and them and you, that's not going to go anywhere either. And that's the same for academics. Academics really will thrive on a foundation of trust as well. So if they feel like they can trust you, their academic success will also thrive. And then number 4, just put a statistic there that comes out of a lot of different research with youth mental health first aid that I've done a lot of trainings for and gone to a lot of their trainings. they talk about the importance of having one trusted adult in a student's life. And unfortunately, we have a lot of kids that go through, and especially our school, we have 2,400 kids at our school right now. We have a lot of kids that will walk through this hallway every single day, 7.5 hours, and not have one trusted adult here. And that's, that's a problem. So they talk about, if you have one trusted adult, it could be a coach, it could be somebody in their church, it could be somebody in your home life, an aunt, an uncle, a parent. But if you have one trusted adult, it makes them 50% more chance of resiliency to get through whatever hard things come in their life. And so we really want to focus on, you might be that one trusted adult.
Something that we're going to keep coming back to, and I think the reason that maybe a lot of us are teachers are because of relationships that we built with teachers throughout our lives. And that's why I'm here. That's probably why you're here. But just keeping in mind that relationship as a priority. This female student whom I had actually throughout the closure, I had her this semester. She has a background in a current life of trauma, which of course was exacerbated by COVID-19. Her ACE score is very high. She has a long history of discipline referrals and logs. It's all year, every year, constant discipline referrals. And I tried to build a relationship with her. It was a little difficult at first. She's a little sassy one. And we butted heads a couple of times because I too am a sassy one. But we just had to balance out the sass. We built a relationship. So when you think about that and you think about her projection, right, and her state projection, if we're going to talk about data, she was in lower level classes. She has trauma. She's sassy. But we took time to pull her up because I could tell that she was smart. She was in the 99th percentile in every single subject, and she wasn't placed in one honors class. And so we're going to have those students. We've got to think about them. But at the end of the year, I did an anonymous Google form, and I do this every year just to have feedback from them on what happened that was good in the class, what could be improved upon, things like that. It was anonymous, but I totally know this was her, and she actually messaged me about it and told me it was her. But she just said, I would like to let Ms. Dunn know that I thank her for all the support she gave me this year because she's kept me out of more trouble than she knows. And though it doesn't seem like it, I do listen and take account for what you tell me. But the part that really, which was, I'm glad I kept her out of trouble. That's what we like to do. But the thing that really got me was that she knew that I had high expectations for her and that I really believed in her. And so we have to have high expectations for every student in our class. We have to know that every student in our class can learn. Every student in our class can grow regardless of their story. And each of them deserves for us to build a strong relationship with them. And we have to model that. We have to model the willingness to learn. We have to model the willingness to grow, and just be the ones who put our hands out and build relationships with kids.
So when we talk, I will be honest, when we first decided we were going to do this SEL and ELA combination, this was before COVID. And then COVID happened. And of course, coming from a trauma background and coming from the mental health perspective, I knew that this was going to be top of the priority when we got back in August, because our students, even if they're not in a bad home, we have a lot of kids in really, really great homes with really supportive parents. They're going to come back and something's going to be different for them, just like it's going to be different for us as adults. Even if it's something as simple as their sleep routine, our kids are going to come back completely backwards on their full sleep routine. So what I put here is that things that we need to look for coming back into the school in fall that you might see in your classrooms, and why it's important to have that relationship. So you're going to look at increased anxiety and feelings of uncertainty, whether that's trauma or no trauma. A lot of our kids are going to come back and they're going to ask us a lot of questions, a lot of the questions that we don't have answers for, like, hey, are we going to have to wear a mask? Are we not going to have to wear a mask? Am I going to get to lunch to see my friends? Or am I going to have to sit in my classroom? And there's just going to be a lot of the unknowns. So just knowing that they're going to come back with increased feelings of anxiety and uncertainty, that they're going to come back with possible sadness and potentially depression, depending on where they're at with their mental health, at what end of the spectrum they're at. Lack of structure. A lot of them, even those in really, really good homes, you just can't maintain a school-like structure out of school for this long, for 5 months. That's going to be a very, very long time. So you're looking at kids that are going to have to adjust back into a structure and potentially a whole new structure, depending on the decisions that are made. Lack of appropriate social engagements, they're going to have to relearn a lot of skills, especially, well, at any level, they're going to have to relearn skills. But when you're talking about our little ones, they're going to have to relearn like what it's like to say hello, what it's like to engage in conversation. For our high school students, it's going to be like, what is it going to be like to re-engage with people not on social media, actually in person? What does that look like? A wider gap in educational knowledge. You guys know about this. I know that that's probably been in the forefront of your minds, is that that gap has increased. And we'll talk about equity in just a little bit. Increased hopelessness, irritability, number of students on free and reduced lunch. You're going to look at different numbers of students that are going to have to get different resources brought to them because now their parent situations are different, or their guardian situations are different, or maybe they had to move to a whole new house because they couldn't maintain in that one home that they're in. So looking at the free and reduced lunch program. And then increased withdrawal or defiance. There's going to be kids that are going to have a really hard time adjusting back to this, and their response to not knowing how to cope will be increased defiance and withdrawal. If we build those relationships, though, we can hopefully shorten that season that they're in that. So then we're saying how? Okay, Holly, like you told me all this stuff. I understand why this season is going to be very, very difficult. How do we do this? Out there, not every admin team is going to have the same approach to this. Not every teacher is even going to have the same approach to this. What we're going to try to talk to you guys about is some interventions that we have seen be effective, and maybe some interventions that we're going to try in our school system. And then you all can adapt and fit that in as necessary. And of course, Ms. Dunn's going to speak a lot more to the classroom level. But when we're talking about building relationships from day one, that can look very different. Restorative circles have been something that I've seen a lot of schools use that have been really, really effective. And the interesting thing about restorative circles is that it can go full K through 12. You can do those restorative circles in a lot of different ways and capacities, but you can do them throughout the entire educational experience for your district, if that's something that your school's looking at. But that has been something I've seen be really effective. Another idea is we've done 1-minute meetings. I found out about this from a counselor that's in our middle school program, but she did a 1-minute meeting. So she actually met with each of her students. She pulled them outside for 1 minute, and she had like 3 questions she asked. They had 1 minute to talk, and it really gave her insight. She said, and she recorded the different meetings. She took notes on the different meetings. But at that point in time, by the end of her 1-minute meetings, she had seen every single child, and she had talked with all of them, and she had gotten basic information from all of them, but started that relationship. She was able to say one-on-one, hey, how are you? Tell me a little bit about you. So that was something that I thought was really effective for her. And then, of course, incorporating this into your curriculum and honoring your students' trust with their own stories. So a big part about building that trust with your students is not necessarily regurgitating that same story that they tell us. We have a tendency to do that, especially, I will be honest with counseling, it's really hard to know what to say and what not to say in a lot of situations. And you don't want to tell the kids' whole life story, but you want empathy and understanding. So just knowing that whatever your students trust in you, having the ability to decipher what's appropriate for you to talk about with other people and what's not appropriate. But that's one of those ways you build relationships. If they know that they can tell you something and trust that you're going to keep that information, that's going to build that relationship. So that's just a few of the ideas that I had, looking at a little bit of a wider perspective of how do we actually address how to build a relationship with students.
And classroom teacher who has an EOC, who's not tenured in a school system, I look at this and I'm like, okay, so 1-minute meeting, let's say that it's, the scheduling God smiled on me and I only have 29 kids in this class instead of 35. That's 29 minutes. Mm-hmm. And that's if there's no transition time of me to have a meeting with every kid. And so how am I going to work that in? Because I have all these standards to cover. My EOC is the day that I come back from Thanksgiving. Like, we have to write these papers and do these cold writes. And so what I would challenge for you, and I'm challenging myself too, I had never heard of this 1-minute meeting until we were going over this presentation. And I was like, that's really cool. Can I really sacrifice 30 minutes a day? And so just to kind of reframe that and just kind of see the importance of the social emotional piece and make it work for you and make it work for your kids. And so obviously we do some whole group instruction, we do small group instruction, we do independent learning. So at what point in your day and at what point in your week can you work something like this in?
Mm-hmm.
If it's not a 1-minute meeting, if that's not your deal and you don't want to pull kids aside, can you do a Google form check-in? Can you do an index card where they can write a little bit on that? And if you establish from day one, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, I joke with my kids that like we're in a safe space trust tree type thing. And like we joke about it a little bit at the beginning of the year, but it makes a big difference. So know that you can take our information. You can take the resources that we have and just know that no matter if you are a counselor, you still have to deal with scheduling and testing and all that. Teachers, we have to deal with standards and evaluations and EOCs. Even if you don't have an EOC, you still have a lot of standards to cover. But just open and be willing to think about it and just try it in your class. And just know that you really can cover your standards. You can make it work for you. But it's just such an important basis to have in your classroom that it really is worth doing, I promise.
And the 1-minute meetings from the counseling perspective, and this could go hand in hand with the teaching perspective, we did that like once every 9 weeks. It was not a daily thing, but it was just a way to start building that relationship and being consistent. Like if you're going to do something, if you're going to do, maybe you decide that you're going to do restorative circles, but you're only going to do it once a week, just being consistent with that so the kids know what to expect and so the kids will have that outlet.
So again, you guys probably have a relationship. But it's important to have an authentic relationship with them and to model for them what you want them to be back to you. And so just kind of understanding that as you're the instructional leader, and so obviously it's your job to provide the instruction, to provide the structure for the kids, but to also give them that same amount of respect. And so something that I learned, again, I'm not an expert on this and I have a long way to go, but I'm just sharing things with you that I've learned from other people. But just something small that's just a semantic difference is the phrasing of your classroom expectations. And so when we go into like a professional development, I've never been in one where there are rules on the board, right? Like that's not how they phrase it. They phrase it as norms. And so if we as adults are given the grace and we have norms, everyone has value, consider the productive struggle, like these things, just consider giving your students that same kind of setup, and that shows them a little bit more respect than just the rule thing. Like I said a minute ago, establish first thing that the classroom is a safe space. If students feel that they can speak in class, that they can give you feedback, that they're open and that they're willing to share things, then it's going to make a huge difference for you. And it's a little scary at first, or it was to me anyway. I was afraid that if I did the next thing, if I modeled courage or growth mindset, and that I was going to try something and it might not work, I might make a mistake. I was really afraid that my kids would think that maybe I didn't know what I was doing because I tried something and it failed. But I encourage you to model that courage and to model the growth mindset. And honestly, if we tell kids, I need you to try your best and you might fail and it's okay, we've got to have that same attitude for ourselves. And that goes such a long way in building that authentic relationship. And something that we talked about actually that I'm going to change for next year is the norm could be to label apologies and to own the mistake. And that starts with us as teachers, counselors, principals, coaches, just realizing that we've got to model what we want our kids to do, and that'll make the relationships in the classroom more authentic.
And it also gives them language, not to jump in on you, but
No.
like when we're modeling how to label an apology, this is something we were talking about, is how important it is to say, this is what I did. This was my experience. Of course, we work with high schoolers, keep this in mind. This was my experience, and this was the consequences that I saw. You might have felt a different consequence, and this is where we can kind of find that middle ground and apologize. Is that not only is that showing them that they can trust you, not only is that building that relationship that they can come talk to you when they make a mistake, but it's also giving them language for how to do this respectfully and appropriately, that they're going to learn that from later on. So if this starts early on, by the time they get to our level, hopefully they will have that structured language that they've seen modeled 100 times that says, hey, when I make a mistake, this is what could have gone differently. Those hard conversations, but they get good at it because they've seen it so much.
So back up to the first time I heard these things, because I was very much like, I was proud of my classroom management. Like I could manage a classroom. I ran a tight ship. We got through all the standards. We wrote 12 papers before Thanksgiving. All of those things can still happen by modeling these things. I went to a conference in Orlando in 2017, and I went to this session that was called Empowering Students Through Voice or something like that. And I went in, and it was some fourth graders presenting. And I was like, well, great, I'm wasting an hour of my time listening to fourth graders. But I mean, they're awesome. Fourth graders are great. But this is just where I was, and this is what I was thinking. But their whole school was set up with students being partners with admin, students being partners with teachers, students helping to come up with things in the classroom, students giving feedback, having choice for students. And their motto was bless the mess. And they said that sometimes it works out, and sometimes they kind of have to back up and be like, well, that didn't work. But I came back to school, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to try that. It was a little rocky to start with, but I encourage you to do it and to let kids own a little bit more, and to just have like an equal place in the classroom, because it's a lot of fun, honestly. Sometimes it is blessing the mess, as the fourth graders taught me, but it actually is a lot of fun. So as far as building the ELA piece in, obviously a lot of the things that we do in our classroom revolve around the literature that we chose. I decided I guess this was 2 years ago, I had 73 students in class. 2 of them didn't want to take the survey. So my anonymous, but I did SSR in my class, the Sane Silent Reading, where students got to choose their books. There was no list. They got to choose whatever they want within reason, mind you. There are some titles, obviously, we weren't going to let fly. But within reason, they chose what they want, graphic novels, whatever. And then I brought in some high interest texts as far as curriculum goes. And you can look in whole books read when they were the year before me, because I teach 9th grade. The percentage went way up as far as books that they read, just because you can teach kids that there are books that they like. And as research will show you, it's miles on a page. It's not necessarily that they read one book that's a high Lexile level. The more they read, the more their reading stamina builds up. You can throw in some things with some complicated syntax and vocabulary, and they learn that way. But they also build things up by reading things that are interesting to them. Something that actually Allison asked me to talk about that we've started at Science Hill is a club called Project Lit. And I used a little bit of it in my classroom as well. But there's a teacher named Jared Amato who teaches at a low-income metro school in Nashville. But he experiences with his students some things that we still see in communities here. It's not just a metro Nashville thing, but places called book deserts, where residents don't have print books immediately, or they're not within close enough distance to a public library or bookstore to get there. And it occurs in areas nationwide, worldwide. That's an issue that we have. In Project Lit, its whole thing, it was started by students, again, a teacher who gives students choice and voice in his class. But it believes that if you increase culturally relevant books, it improves students' reading attitudes, that you'll see better reading outcomes. And these charts came in from when I got the Project Lit titles. And it's the Project Lit books. Students come together and they pick lists every single year, but they deal with a lot of cultural issues. They're high interest, but they're a good book list to check out as far as things to have in your classroom library, things to pull excerpts from to tie in with other things. but choice reading of high interest texts led to student growth. Again, I'm all about some feedback from kids. I do Google Forms. We do index cards. Like I have massive piles of index cards because I'm constantly trying to get feedback from my students. I appreciate an administration that gets feedback from teachers because we're the ones in the classroom. And so just like I would like them to be that way, I try to get feedback from my kids all the time. And so something that I asked them again anonymously, after I started the choice reading, I started the Project Lit books, I asked them how they'd grown as a reader. And I didn't fix like grammar or whatever in here. I just left it straight up authentic for the kids. I've grown by becoming more interested with reading, which as an English teacher, I'm like, well, you know, your test scores were whatever, but you love to read now. And so I still feel like I won, you know. I feel I better understand things when I'm reading them. I could read quicker. I have read on a higher reading level with deeper topics. This last one kind of broke my heart to start with, but then it made me feel good. I used to love reading, but I quit. So this year I learned to get back into reading. I learned how to analyze the book. And I did this with kids reading all different things. I just provided similar assessments, but these are actual student testimonials. And mind you, these are from like our low to regular level kids. These are not honors level kids who are giving this.
I have a question, right?
Yeah.
I'm just jumping in. When you let your kids pick, I know you let them pick like what topic they want. You even say graphic novels. I know some classes in middle school, they take like STAR testing and stuff before school starts to get
yeah.
on. Does it matter to you like which level they're reading on, or?
No, I don't care. I figure that my job as a classroom teacher is to push them on the tech complexity rubric with both the, you know, the Lexile level and the level there. I can take care of that as far as an instructor. Like that's what I'm good at. I'm given a curriculum now, like we can do these things. But I would like to think that all of my kids are going to love Fahrenheit 451, which I'm teaching in the fall. I love that book. And I would like to think in my English teacher heart that I'm so awesome that I'm going to present it in a way that they're going to like it. But realistically, I know that that's actually not going to happen. And so I'll let them pick whatever level. I mean, obviously, we're not going to have like some green eggs and ham because we'll have a discussion about that, right? But if you give them a chance, they actually will pick things that will challenge them for the most part. And if you pick like the Project Lit books, they're young adult books, all vary your syntactical whatever with those books. But they give you qualitatively, topic-wise, things to create critical thinking.
Mm-hmm. Right, and it's probably like a lot more topics that they can see themselves in, they can see others in, that kind of thing, to where you probably challenge them more like on Lexile level with the literature and stuff that you have that you're actually teaching in class, not just like this silent reading that they're doing on their own.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Something that we're also working on, we actually had a meeting this morning kind of about culturally responsive teaching. And I can't see all, oh, there we go. So culturally responsive teaching means that relationships are characterized by mutual respect and care, which we've been talking about. High expectations for learning for everyone. So we put that there. Everyone can learn, everyone can grow. Realistically, in a classroom, we know that some kids are going to need more scaffolding than others. And so we have that ready. We don't automatically scaffold. We don't automatically assume they can't do it. We let them try. If they need the scaffold, we give it to them. But there's a balance of explicit instruction and authentic application. Mary, you know what? I've just read, I don't know how to say her name, so I'm going to say Conage and pretend like that's how you say it. It looks good to me, and I took French. So, but her research for engaging and building relationships revolves around 6 M's. We're going to talk about 2 of these. But she talks about meaning, models, monitoring of feedback, mouth, music, and movement. Mm-hmm. And obviously, culturally responsive is going to mean different things depending on what school you're in. But we can apply this to all of our kids and be culturally responsive.
Hey, Reed, can I stop you one more second? There's Dawn Taylor has a question. It says, were these texts read as a group, power teams, or individually? So did your kids read them?
So the answer to that is yes, because I've done it different ways. The first year I did literature circles with them, but that's because I got a grant and was able to buy the books. So if you don't have funding to buy the books this way, the rest of the years I've just done independent reading. And so the first 20 minutes of class, the kids knew they came in, they got their book, they sat in their desks and they read for 20 minutes. I had a couple of, I know I don't like the word rule, but something that was a rule for us that I took very seriously was that if they started a book and they didn't like it, then they were to read, 10, 15 pages. If they didn't like it, they were to immediately shut it and put it away and never do it again. And so we did some stations on the first day, and I let them do some book tastings. It's like they read the back of the book. If some teachers took them to the library, I have a lot of gracious friends who provided me with a classroom library because I begged with an Amazon wish list on Facebook. And so all of my friends bought me all of my books. But school libraries can do this too. I found the best way to do it, though, to work with my curriculum was to do just the 20 minutes at the beginning of class every day and just let them read. Because we work for schools and I have an EOC, I can't give kids 20 minutes every day of just reading and just we're going to do this and have fun and love books. We have to assess them because we have an EOC and that's how it is. So I've actually provided you guys in your resources with a choice board that I made for students, and it's aligned to different tested standards. I got the standards off of the blueprint for the EOC, and each year that changes. I'll revisit that. But it's something like a literary postcard where they have to use text evidence in there, get from it. So it's aligned to standards. So I'm still assessing, but I found the best way to do it is independent reading.
I'm going to give Niswonger Foundation, the Rural Life Grant, like a shameless plug right here, that if you're a teacher that happens to be in the second part of the grant that's getting ready to start, this was a way that my schools in the first part of the grant spent a lot of their money was buying classroom libraries and going through, and we bought, and they were all high interest SEL books, and we provided teachers with enough books to do book clubs to where they could have discussions if you wanted to once a week. But anyway, I just thought I'd give a shameless plug that if you are part of the grant, that you might want to keep that in mind in the next year when you are trying to figure out what you need for your classrooms.
Oh no, that's not even, that's a great plug. If you do have the money and you have the money for book clubs like that, it's a powerful way to do it. I included in the stuff Allison's going to give you a way to do literature circles that way. That's just a dream that I'm not going to see happen until I get another grant from the school system because I just don't have that much money to buy books. But no, that's a good way to do it. So we'll talk about those two things that are actually blurry to me, and I'll put them better on these slides. So leveraging access is all about building equity in your room, and culturally responsive rooms are all about building equity for students who are low socioeconomic status, they're African American, Latinx, Native American, a lot of our subgroup populations. If you look nationally at their achievement data, you'll see that we have a huge gap in equity. And I know that it's not all about the data, but the data does tell a story. And so when you look at that, you'll see that we're missing out a lot of pieces as far as building equity. And so social emotional learning that Holly was talking about is a way to build equity, getting everyone's narrative, getting everyone's story, balancing that out. But you can also do it as a classroom teacher by making relevant connection to their lived experiences. And that's another way that your classroom library can do that. Allison has a list of books. She's got the project list. She's got another list actually, but things that appeal to all of your students that can help both validate their experience, it can empower them, and that'll make a huge difference for you. And that'll enhance motivation with them as well. So that's the meaning off of Mary Conage's 6 N's.
And for this, we just wanted to kind of plug this visual. I love this visual. I know that we talk about equality and equity in education all the time, but again, it's kind of like social emotional learning. It's just a term that gets thrown around. What does it actually mean? And this is what she's talking about, how when you're looking at scaffolding, when you're looking at classroom expectations, equity is on the right, obviously, and things look different for each person for them to be able to have access to the same education. So of course, we talk about this term all the time. When you're looking at social emotional learning and you're actually building those relationships with students, you will learn so much more about what their needs are because you have that relationship with them than even just data points will tell us. Of course, data is taken with judgment. You have to layer on a lot of things. You see their data points, but you also layer on their affect in the classroom, what their home experience is like. When you're taking those things into account, you're going to be building that equity so much easier and quicker in your classroom, and it's going to show itself in your academic success with your kids. So I just love that visual because I do think that helps really show us what are we saying whenever we're saying we're equitable. Like what are the action steps? What are different for the individuals involved?
A conversation that we've had as a grade level team. The one on the left is fair, right? So what's the difference between being fair and being equitable? So being fair is giving everybody the same block versus being equitable is giving them what they actually need. And so that sometimes can be a fiery conversation. It's talking about fair versus equitable.
Yeah, this is not an easy conversation by any stretch.
No.
And it's not black and white. It's hard to say these are the answers for all the different situations. But if you're really investing in this and you're looking at the cultural expectations, how to be culturally responsive, how to look at social emotional learning in the context of everything that's happening in our society right now, this will benefit you to have those hard conversations.
And so this next conversation we're going to have with you all comes off of basically a 2-hour meeting this morning where a group of us got together and talked about sensitive topics. Obviously, we have some things going on that affect us, affect our students, affect our world with some things that are going on now. And sometimes we're afraid to talk about those things, but for what's happening now and the narratives that our students have, we're going to have to address these things. We're going to have to talk about them. We're going to have to give kids a safe space to talk. Mm-hmm. Their homes may or may not be a safe space, but them coming together, just like us today, with your questions, with discussion that I hope we're going to have, we can learn from you, you can learn from us, and just having that same attitude among kids. But Fahrenheit is my favorite book. And one of the characters told another character that we need to be really bothered once in a while. Mm-hmm. And so I think we can apply that in our lives as people. When we're uncomfortable is when we grow. And so when we're uncomfortable in the classroom because we're trying something new, that's how we grow. We can teach that to our kids. But again, the key to being able to have conversations and when students bring things up, particularly in English classes, I think we hit a lot of sensitive things because of literature, and that's what we love, is to talk about the literature and to connect it to them and to bring it full circle to their lives and to the world. But the key to this and the way that you can make these things work in your classroom, regardless of whether it's a sensitive time or not, but it's to build that relationship with your students. That being said, current events involving racial tension and inequality will not die down before we go back to school, particularly for our students who aren't around other students. As soon as they come back in the building, assuming we come back in the building, we don't know. But if we come back in the building, that's going to explode, right? Mm-hmm. Like they're all going to be back together. They're all going to want to talk about it. They're all coming from different spaces. We as educators have a responsibility to provide facts to them, not bring them to our side, teach them to critically think. Again, with the right relationship, students will learn from each other's experiences. I taught The Hate You Give for a few years. When it came out, I started teaching it. I had a podcast from a police officer explaining their line of thought, their reasoning when these things happen. And then I taught The Hate You Give. And I'm not going to lie, the first time I taught it, I was terrified. I was like, I'm going to get fired. I was like, I'm going to teach about race in that class, and I'm going to mess it up, and I'm going to say something bad, or a kid's going to say something bad, and then I'm going to be finding another job. I was terrified. But that goes back to that feeling uncomfortable and growing from that. And I was really proud of my students. Like, we established a safe space. I just told them, I was like, this makes me uncomfortable. I'm afraid I'm going to say something that's going to be the wrong thing to say. But just everybody's showing everybody grace. Obviously, we have to keep in mind our district's policies as far as that goes, because each of us has a different admin, a different set of folks around us. But I just challenge you not to shy away from those things, but to build those relationships with your kids and just be ready to have those conversations, because you'll grow from that, and so will your kids.
And that's kind of why we also structured our presentation this way, because to have those really hard conversations that are very rich in learning, you have to have that relationship with them first. I know we keep going back to that, and it's kind of annoying for us to keep saying that, but it's true. They will not be able to open up and trust to have that conversation unless you've built that prior relationship with them from day one. And really, given the fact that we're in the situation that we're in, and whether we're going to be in the school or not, in the actual school building or not, we're going to have to build relationships with these kids from the very beginning of school year this year, and know that we can confidently fall back on that relationship if needed, if whatever happens. So when we're talking about social emotional learning and trust and safety, and then transferring that into a classroom to be able to talk about hard conversations and multiple perspectives on hard conversations and multiple accounts of different people's experiences, you have to have that relationship first. So then this is just talking about how to build that equity in the classroom, which we've covered a lot of this already. But them being able to openly talk about these hard conversations is a part of helping them regulate their own affect. Okay, I'm going back to my mental health side and saying, when we're trying to teach our students social emotional learning, affect regulation is a big part of that. How do you have hard conversations? How do you control your anger if you feel like somebody's done something that's not been right? How do you control your sadness if you feel like somebody's hurt your feelings? All of that is affect regulation, and that can be you can help foster that in the classroom by having these hard conversations in an appropriate way. Does not mean to stifle conversations, does not mean to stifle emotional expression even. It just means how to do it in the right way, and how to show our kids that we can do that in the right way. So that's really, when you're looking at equity in the classroom and social emotional learning, you're also really looking at how you're going to help them regulate their own affect, as we do the same when we're in those conversations.
The next piece, I'm going to kind of talk about classroom application, show you some things, and then I don't know where your systems are as far as adopting materials from the state and ELA, and how much you're basically tied to that in your classroom. But we'll talk about that on a spectrum. It is 1:57. Mm-hmm. Allison, do you want to take about a 15-minute break?
That's fine. If this is a good stopping place, that's absolutely fine. In fact, we could do probably 10 minutes maybe.
Yeah.
Done a little early.
Yeah. And we also wanted to leave you all plenty of time for questions, like we said. So please make sure that you have those written down, or you're going to add them to the chat, anything that you need.
So we're going to get kind of into the classroom application now. Just some things that I found helpful, that I've taken from books, from conferences, from other people, from kids. A lot of these things actually students have come up with as ideas, which I took seriously, and they work. So, but the strategies for meaning our relationship, again, ding, there's another one, relevance and responsibility. The relevant, varied, high interest literature comes at an interesting time for us. Here in Johnson City, we have adopted the Pearson material, 612. We decided as a department that we're going to implement those with fidelity, meaning there's no more of what I've done my entire career, which is pick this text and this text and this text and this text, and then kind of figure out what works and what doesn't and switch it out. We're sticking with the textbook. So what we've agreed to do so that we can bring in that relevant, varied, high interest literature, some of it is going to be that way within the textbook, and some of it, I'll just be honest, isn't. So the sustained silent reading at the beginning of class every 20 minutes, we've decided to do as a department, and that's where we're going to bring that in, is for those things. Socratic seminars are something that all ages and levels of students can do. Allison has some materials that I'm going to provide for you of different ways I've done that. I do a modified one. I have a picture of my kids sitting in a circle. I don't do the 4 people in the middle where you tap one in and one out, because I feel that just wasn't effective for me. So all of my kids sit in a circle. We have some prep activities, but basically I just turn it over to them. I'm a moderator. I'll point at someone to start because none of them want to start. So somebody will start. We'll throw out quotes. We'll throw out thoughts. Just establishing some norms for those, that everybody has a value and a voice. But that's where some pretty powerful things have come from my class, or through those. Response pieces with feedback from you where you can concentrate on a skill. So this is a way that we can bring in that social emotional piece, providing them with articles about social emotional learning, their responses to pieces of literature, but you can do personal responses and still teach your standards. Trust me, I know what it's like to have everything standards based all the time. Like I'm there with you, I feel that. But you can bring in your language standards and just, I've done some things over closure to keep a quarantine journal. But on Tuesday, here's a video about parallel structure, write, 4 of your sentences using proper parallel structure. And so you can give them that outlet and nurture that social emotional piece while still giving them a standards-based thing that they are tested on that you can go back then and give them feedback with. Sustained silent reading I talked about. And then choice boards. I found I've had a lot of fun with choice boards. For one thing, when you give 95 kids the same essay and you grade that 95 times, about essay 37, you're kind of tired of reading about coral. So a way to give kids choice in the class, they own it a little bit more, so it's more fun for them. But selfishly, it's also more fun for us. But as far as student choice, I don't really have teacher handwriting, but I use different colored markers, so we'll celebrate that. But right before Thanksgiving last year, I gave them 3 options that were still standards aligned, but just kind of turn it over some of the responsibility to them. I let them analyze, which one of these they wanted to do each day. They had to choose 2 of 3. One of them was an argument cold write, and I presented them with the text and the state-aligned prompt. Option 2 was a narrative cold write to tie that to the standard, the text, the state-aligned prompt. And then option 3, actively learn. I don't know if you've heard of it or not, but it basically saved us in our department before we got, honestly, good materials. But it's an online catalog of different texts of all sorts. They have novels, poems, nonfiction, fiction, everything you can imagine, all grade levels. They do science, social studies, and English language arts. But I created a choice board for kids for actively learn. They got to choose a text and then do an activity from a choice board. And so it took a little bit, I'm not going to lie, it takes a little bit of time to come up with a choice board because you have to come up with something that's engaging, that's standards aligned. You have to make sure that kids understand why it's standards aligned. You have to show them, how to do it. You have to come up logistically with how it's going to work. But once you get into it and you've made 1 or 2, then you'll find it's a lot of fun for your kids and it's more engaging for you because you can get that energy from your kids. So there's that. There's my choice board for the sustained silent reading checkpoint assessment. I didn't do a reading log because some kids read faster than others. So I chose not to keep a reading log for them. I gave them some responsibility. I gave them some autonomy. And for the most part, it turned out really well and kids took it seriously. But there are some options for them and standards that they're aligned to. Again, I teach English 9, and so these are the 9-10 standards. Of course, they're spiraled up, so the heart of the standard is the same down to like 3rd grade. But this is what I did.
You've got a question from Dawn.
Yeah.
You see, it says your choice boards have time limitations. When do they choose do they choose like when they're reading and they know that this is like what their end goal is going to be and you go, okay, this is the date when all this is due? How do you do it?
Yeah, I've done it both ways. I've done it, actually the first time I did it, I was like, okay, you guys are going to read 20 minutes a day and I'm going to have a choice board for you. And again, like modeling this growth mindset, I was like, I don't really know what's going to be on there, and I'm not sure what that's going to look like, but when I make it, it's going to be amazing. Like, I'd like to come in here and tell you guys that, like, I knew absolutely what I was doing from, the start, but I asked kids, I'm like, what do you want on it? And some of their ideas were good. Some of them not so much. Like the ugly sweater, a kid came up with that, and he's like, we can come up with stuff symbolic in the book. And I was like, check, that's going on the choice board. But like the scene from another character's point of view, that's straight up one of the options that they could have on the EOC as a narrative essay. And so I chose that one. But so the first time I gave it to them at the very end, and they didn't know what the choices were, just because I hadn't made it yet. But I got feedback from them that they wanted it first. And so I gave them the choice board first. I was like, you're going to have to do this in 2.5 weeks. On this Wednesday, we're going to spend some time in class doing this. And so they knew the end point. So I've done it both ways. The better part is to give it to them to start with. This is, the paper falling off my wall. This is real life classroom right here. Y'all know painter's tape isn't exactly the most effective, but that's all we're allowed to use. So, but here's the modified Socratic seminar that I've done, and you'll see that everybody is sitting there in a circle. They've got their books. Those kids had their computers because our novel was actually online, but these students have actual papers. But there are different ways that you can do those. I've given Allison some ways to do it, but basically anything that you can do for the students to give them the autonomy and give them the responsibility for running it, the better it's going to be, not just for them academically, but for a life skill for them. A lot of what we do in high school is to kind of help them be like, functioning adults. And so if we make all the choices for them and we do everything for them all the time and hold their hands all the way through, then they're going to go to college, and that's not necessarily how it works. So we need to help set them up as much as we can. The last one I did, last Socratic seminar I did, was at the end of a unit. And so we tied in our text that was centered around different pieces. And I gave them a 3-2-1 chart. So they had to give 3 questions that would generate discussion. And so we talked about the difference in questioning there. I stole some stuff from the team rubric actually to put in there. The 2 things, they had to put 2 insights from the book. We talked about what an insight was. And then the 1 category was 1 quote from the book that stood out to them. And so they could throw out any of those things. As I didn't grade it, I told them it wasn't for a grade, which was also scary for me because I was always along the line of, if I don't have a grade for it, they won't do it. But I found that that's actually not the case. They came prepared. They wanted to do it. They were okay that it wasn't a grade. And I think setting that expectation for them too is more realistic. I come into work and I can do bare minimum, only what I'm getting paid for, or I can be someone who doesn't, and just, it kind of sets that up for them too, that they don't always get graded for everything. Something that I've done to incorporate movement, which also helps the social emotional piece. It's hard for me to sit still for very long, and I'm not 14. So I can't imagine coming in and sitting down from 7:40 in the morning until 2:45 in the afternoon, with having 8 minutes in the hallway between classes, and then every other time I have to sit there. So I do a lot of movement in my classroom. There's my child, I miss him. I didn't get him all semester because that was during closure, and I missed that kid. But anyway, just writing. I bought some cheap markers, just taping paper up on the wall. I got this paper at Walmart for $8, and I think that roll is going to last me for like 8 years. But I just tape it up along the wall. I give them a question. Kids go write. This was one of my questions from the Hate You Give that I put on the wall. I give them choice so they can reply to 2 of the 7. And so I just turn them loose and they walk around and go answer those questions. One of my favorite things I did for them was a progressive dinner. I mean, you can look this stuff up online. You can just Google progressive dinner in English class, but just presenting them with different texts and let them move around the room. And I bought these plates. These are the ones that you don't want to eat pizza off of because they're really thin and really cheap, and the grease soaks through, and then you've got a mess, everywhere because they're not good to eat off of. But they're really, really good to write on. So kids thought it was really fun to just write on those. We did some text, we did some questions. I do a lot with Post-it notes, but just anything you can get to get them up and moving helps that social emotional piece as well, because it keeps them engaged, it gets them up. And I can appreciate that as somebody who doesn't like to sit still either. But these are all really, really, really cheap ways to get kids up and moving in your class and engaged. Oh yeah, that's mine. Sorry, it's the wrong color. So
Question.
do what?
I said, I think there's a question.
Okay, yeah, I can't see the chat box, so.
Yeah, love the wall questions. How do you do that in huge classes?
Oh, welcome to our lives, right? So it just honestly, it depends on the class, because some of our classes, you can say, okay, 35 kids, get markers and go write on the wall. And then some classes, obviously, that's not going to work. So I'll send half of them. So like half of them can read or do, parallel structure activities. I'm stuck on parallel structure, whatever. So you feel that in your class and you can send half of them. Always give them time, like always time them, and think that you're not going to give them enough time. So you have 7 minutes to go write the answers to 2 of these questions and come back to your desk, time them, tell them how much time they have left, keep them to that. So just depending on your class, send half of them and have the other half doing something. Or if you have it's not 4th period in May on a Friday, then you can send them all. During closure, I think all of us were in a different place. I mean, it was easier on some of us than it was others. Finding ourselves, I found myself at home with a professor husband who also had to teach and make videos, and a toddler, and all these kids to take care of still. I mean, it was a stressful time for me. And so I think choice board might be up there with relationships as far as annoying things that we're saying too much today. But I made a choice board for my kids on that too. And it had things like read this nonfiction piece and find a poem that relates to it thematically. So things that we do in our classes anyway. But one thing that I found for them that was standards aligned, I found an article from Psychology Today and one from Common Lit on self-care that both showed its importance and how to implement it. The Common Lit, that saved me some time. If you guys are familiar with Common Lit, they have questions that are aligned to Common Core standards, but we can obviously adapt those since Common Core was the home of our standard. But they already have questions written. And so I took those articles from Psychology Today and the one from Common Lit, and we had discussion boards on Canvas on our learning management system that we have. You can do it on Google Classroom as well as writing prompts incorporating language standards, again, because we're still held responsible for those standards, to reflect on the evidence in the article and its application to us. And the first time I did that, I actually joined in, and I was the first person to reply to it. And I shared what I did for self-care too, to model it for my students, and just explain to them, you guys know I have a baby at home and all this stuff. It's just telling them what I got from that, modeling my willingness to learn and grow from texts. And I had such good feedback from that from my kids. One of my students actually, she told us in a discussion board, like out for everybody to see, because we had that safe space in our classroom from day one, that her sister had struggled with different things, and that she made a chart, which one of the articles said to do, make a self-care chart of things you can do, took it to her sister, they worked on it together. Another student messaged me and said that her family had been struggling, but she made a chart for them, and as a family, 2 days that week, they did self-care things with their family. And so things that we do with our kids to connect to social emotional learning can have so much more of an effect. Like obviously my kids this spring didn't take end of course tests, but nobody their sophomore year in college is going to care what they made on my end of course test. But if they can learn these social emotional strategies through things we do that are standards aligned, but if we can teach them these things, then that'll carry with them far into adulthood. And we thought this was a powerful graphic. If a child can't learn the way we teach, maybe we should teach the way they learn. Again, building on that social emotional piece, acknowledging that, building that authentic relationship, and just realizing that that has to be there before any academic content can come in and have any sort of connection.
On the next slide, I just put in a few resources. I know that she has a lot of resources for the classroom. This is just social emotional reading that you guys can look at. Specifically, there's a ruler approach that is a social emotional learning based curriculum. I know a lot of schools are doing. It's out of the Yale Center of Emotional Intelligence. It's a really great, definitely a good place to get a lot of information, even if you don't implement the ruler approach. Castle has social emotional learning for parents in COVID-19, especially if we go back out again, that might be something that you're able to like use in your classrooms and also send to parents. There's one for teachers, social emotional learning, and then ASCA. So I just wanted to provide some of those places for you to do a little exploration of how you can layer this into your classroom. She's given us a ton of examples, but you may have a different standard, or admin might support you differently. So make sure that you're looking at how is this going to work in your classroom for your school.
And then I don't have any references. I had a bunch of random pictures that I tweeted, but
this is just my data.
Holly's got references.
I was just going to add, from what I can tell, with the SEL, it's such a buzzword, and everybody knows right now that there's so many unknowns that, I know Pearson, I know Amplify, a lot of the companies in ELA, they're going to have that sort of personalized SEL stuff. They're going to have some of that stuff built into these new programs. Mm-hmm. It's going to be great once we can finally get our hands on them and see how they built it in, and like you were saying, Reed, a lot of it's not that difficult where you talk about, let's look at these characters, and just even sometimes switching some of your questions up instead of saying, why did this character do this? It's easy to look at questions and say, how did you know that this character was upset? Or does that make sense? I mean, it's easy to just add that little twist in there, and then all of a sudden you're kind of hitting just some of the social emotional stuff that you need to sort of weave into your lessons.
Allison, I'll add on to that, because like with that shift in the questioning that you made, there's still such a rich potential to ask for text evidence. We're still, we're just, trying to position students to make them more aware of the aspects that tie to social emotional learning.
And the questions about, why did the author do that? And when you're trying to look at arguments and stuff like that, I mean, there's so much like that about, especially with hot button topics that are going to come up. Why was it written this way? What are they trying to convince you, or whatever?
Mm-hmm. We're open to any questions, and if we don't know, I promise we won't make stuff up. We'll tell you we don't know.
I love you, Ree. Well, if we can stick around for a few minutes, and we're ending up early, and I know we all kind of sometimes appreciate that on a Thursday afternoon.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you're
we do appreciate you guys hanging with us. Yeah. We normally do presentations in person. I know that you guys know this, but it's a very different experience. So doing it via Zoom, we appreciate you guys taking the time to log on and to be here and to listen. We want any questions, any concerns, anything that you all need, but thank you for sticking with us, because this is a different platform. It's not our favorite. As a counselor, it's definitely not my favorite. I'm an in-person person, so.
I'm talking about Socratic seminars and movement and writing on plates on the wall, and then you sat here for an hour and a half and listened to my screen.
Yeah.
This is not preferable for us either, but thank you, really. Thank you.
Well, and we'll put some materials in the materials folders on the website. And so if you are interested in maybe some book titles, some good book club material, just a bunch of the different SEL stuff that we kind of used over the years, it'll be in that materials folder for you. Also, John Payne has put in the certificate of attendance link down there at the bottom, and it is time stamped. And so you need to make sure you kind of fill that out like in a timely manner, just so you get credit for taking this virtual session. So, and he put a note on there, you have to have it done by the time 30 minutes after the session is over. So jump on that and fill it in so you get credit for this. Again, we'll stick around, but I think that's all we have. We really do appreciate you guys coming to the Rural Life Virtual Summer Institute, and thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Guys,
Thank
we'll
you.
stick around for a little bit.
Yep.